All right, welcome to Rock and Roll Medicine. Today I have with me Alan Niven, ex Great White and Guns N' Roses manager. Um, we are going to talk about his new book, um, and it is. Let's see if I get this wrong. Sound and Fury Rock and Roll Stories. Is that correct? Am I right?
You got it correct, Denny.
So, and this isn't just so people are aware. Um, this is not a autobiography. This is just random stories. I got to read through the book. I liked the book. There was some stuff in there that I didn't know, and then there was stuff in there that I'm like, okay, I heard about this, but I didn't really know about it. And then of course I got a million questions. so, and I'm sure you get that a lot. The whole million questions. Is that true, Alan? How are you doing today?
Well, Denny, back in the day, I always turned down interviews, and I operated on the point of view that I thought the bands that I was working with were eloquent enough. I didn't need to make any comment. Um, especially since with one of the bands, I was one of the main writers. And, when you come up with the storyboard for Welcome to the Jungle, any further comment is pretty superfluous. I mean, there it is. There's the song, there's the lyric, there are the images that have been put with it. So back in the day, I also wanted to try and keep some anonymity, try and hold on to a tiny bit of privacy. Good luck with that. I made the mistake of letting Nigel Dick put me in the Paradise City video for 2 or 3 seconds, and that was it. My anonymity was gone, and that makes you vulnerable to people just coming up to you and using your first name, and you're feeling really bad because you're thinking, who is this person I don't know who's using my first name, and I'm obviously being rude, and I'm obviously missing the context I know this person in. And then the wife leans in and goes, no, honey, it's just somebody who knows who you are. Don't freak
right.
out. So
yeah,
anyway.
and yeah. Before we get into all that GNR and Great White stuff, I kind of wanted to throw this out and kind of. So in 1984, I was 12 years old.
Okay.
And I was living in Clear Lake, California. I don't know where that's at. I don't know if you know where that's at. It's up north, Northern California. And I have an uncle who's 4 years older than I am. And when we go visit, he would, make me mixtapes, And of course, like my birthday falls in November and Christmas is coming. And my first cassette, other than these mixtapes and dubbed, was Quiet Riot, Mental Health. And then for Christmas, I got like Rat Out of the Cellar and Prince Purple Rain, right? So, but the one band that like always stood out to me and was like that I was captivated by was The Crew, right? So after reading your book, I'm like, you had your fingers in a lot of those bands, pointing them into like Crew with Elektra, Dokken with Elektra, and Rat with Atlantic. Um, was Great White EMI? I can't remember.
First of all, they were EMI. They were
And
signed in November of 1983 to EMI USA.
okay,
And then they were dropped in 1984 and then re-signed by the same company, Capitol, in 1986.
yeah. So I guess
Capitol, basically the same company.
right. So I guess in a roundabout way, either indirectly or directly, you affected my upbringing musically. Because I think if you hadn't, I would probably be listening to Electric Boogaloo 2, or something on that level. I mean, there was always classic rock. Well, it was really classic rock back in that day. but there was always that stuff in my house. So, first of all, I want to thank you for that, for pushing those bands to get them signed. And I agree with you that there was a lot of luck involved with some of these bands. I would say Crew in general. The stars kind of aligned because, you know, Vince isn't the best singer. Nicky isn't the best bass player. He could write a song. I think everybody just pretty much rode Tommy's backs. I mean, Mick's a really good guitar player, but he's not a shredder, right? And I don't think he ever wanted to be a shredder. But um, I know you had mentioned that Crew, you also believe Crew is kind of like the stars kind of aligned and in their favor. Plus, they had an image, whereas a lot of the bands didn't have that edgy image that the Crew did. So, um, and I
Well,
didn't realize how much you were into all that, and how much I didn't realize that that you were roommates with Don Dawkins either. I had no idea.
well, let's start with Motley Crue image. When I was a nipper, a record that I dearly liked, dearly loved, was called Love It to Death by Alice Cooper. That caught my imagination. And if you turned the sleeve around, there was a photograph of the band that I looked at and I went, oh my God, if that's rock and roll, I would like to be a part of that. Look how amazing they look. And in many respects, back in 81, 82, whenever, there was a signing freeze on. So,
Right, I do remember that.
yeah, the labels weren't signing anybody. And they looked at Motley Crue as Alice Cooper light. Well, for me in Greenworld, Alice Cooper light was a little bit of a blessing because it was a little bit of rock and roll. And Greenworld was not known for having any sensibility in that direction in terms of connecting with rock and roll records. So when Mark Wesley, one of the owners of the company, gave me a cassette and said, can you take this home and evaluate it? And I was traveling light. My stereo at that time was just a JVC boombox with a pair of Sennheiser speakers. And my entertainment center was a 13-inch color TV at the end of my bed. I mean, I was traveling light at this point. I'd already spent a year in Miami, then gone to Sweden for 2 years, now back in California. And, my arms and shoulders were beginning to ache from carrying luggage. So,
yeah, those TVs weren't.
Yeah, less is more. And I thought the record that he asked me to evaluate was a bit of a train wreck. It wasn't that well produced or recorded, but there was an unmistakable vitality and attitude in the groove. And most importantly to me, there was a rock and roll song that I thought, that's as good as any Cheap Trick song. And that was Piece of Your Action. And I liked that. Mm-hmm. Not exactly the most stunning intellectual content, but it felt real good. And that was enough for me to go back into Mark Wesley and say, whatever we have to do, let's try and get this band signed to our little company. And eventually Mark asked me to take over the discussions with Alan Kaufman, their management. And I put a contract together, and that was the start of the relationship with Motley Crue. And of course, at Greenworld, if we could sell 10 or 15,000 copies of a single title, we'd done really, really well. It was a small company. Mm-hmm. So obviously, as soon as we got them signed, my personal mission was, now we need to get them onto a major label and see if we cannot forge some sort of a relationship between Greenworld and the major label. Part of the thinking was, they have farm teams for baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Greenworld could be a really good musical farm team. We could test things out without having to break the bank in terms of continental size marketing. I always had the perception that the US and the United Kingdom were exact opposites, in that in the United States, the way to maximize a record company's profit was to get everybody to buy one record. Okay, so the focus would be on getting that one track played in every single city around the country, so that everybody is coordinating their focus onto that one track and that one record. Because we're dealing with sales and marketing on a continental size basis, and that's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas little old England, tiny little old England, mate, the art, you've got a lovely cat behind you. The art was to get not everyone to buy one record, but in England, the idea was to get one person to buy every record, because it was a tiny little market. And to maximize your sales and thereby look for profitability, you wanted to stimulate people to be interested in all kinds of music. So we had the power of the English press, Sounds, NME, Melody Maker, Kerrang, and so on. And that encouraged people to respond to music in a general way and not a niche fashion. In America, we're prone to niche, death metal,
right,
burning Norwegian church metal, sinking tanker in the ocean metal, whereas in England, if you were into Roxy Music, you could also be into Bob Marley, you could also be into Deep Purple, and everyone's into Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones. And there's a much greater breadth of style promoted in England, because they're trying to get the one person to buy every single record that they manufacture.
Right. I see.
You follow me?
Yes.
So anyways, with Motley, the fact that other people thought that they were Alice Cooper light, the fact that they thought they were dinosaurs, was very appealing to me, because I liked Alice Cooper, and I have always loved what was then termed dinosaur rock. Zeppelin 1 had a huge impact on me when it first came out. Or one or two Deep Purple records that I went, that's awesome. Deep Purple and rock. Oh my God, what a great record. Terrible cover, great record. So there was an appeal in Motley, and the fortunate and accidental thing was running into a guy from Elektra at a convention at a big old hotel in LA, and he came up to our little Greenworld booth, and I'd put up a lot of posters, Motley Crue posters, and he says, "Do you have something to do with Motley Crue?" Which kind of made me laugh, Denny, because I'm going, wow, what are all the fucking posters here for?
Yeah, right.
And I said, and who are you? Why are you asking? Oh, well, I'm Tom Zutaut, and I'm from Elektra. And as soon as he said, I'm from Elektra, the light bulb goes on in my head, and I go, this is somebody I need to talk to for a little while.
Yes.
Because he's inside the record company. And those record companies, especially when they had a signing freeze going, Denny, were like fortresses. It was really hard to get anybody to notice anything, and knocking on the door usually only got you silence in return. So with Tom, I said, well, Electra, that's very interesting. Maybe you should come and have dinner up in my little cottage on Palos Verdes, and we can talk about things. And that was the start of a friendship that lasts to this day. He came up we had this tiny, tiny, tiny little cottage on Palos Verdes overlooking Catalina Island, and there were wild peacocks walking around. I mean, it was just,
nice.
Oh, it was a heaven. You come from England, and English weather, and English poverty, an English societal feudal system, and you find yourself in a tiny cottage overlooking Catalina Island. You think you've died and gone to heaven.
Yeah.
It's magic. So Tom came up to the house, and back in those days, I would sometimes try and shortcut the development of a relationship. Cut through stuff and see who the person was and try and get a sense of their soul quickly by cooking one of my better dishes, which was chicken a la LSD. So I cooked that for Tom. Tom came up on the Friday. He finally got back to Hollywood on the Monday. But we were friends from that moment on. And obviously we got Motley onto Electra. And as they say, the rest is history.
So were you roommates with Dawn at that time as well?
No. I came into my Green World office one morning, and we had a really nice, cool receptionist. The first female that I ever saw with tattoos. She was the first person, female I'd ever seen with tattoos. That'll tell you how long ago it was. And she smiled and she said to me, "I've got a friend who wants to bring you a record. Can he come in and talk to you?" And I said, "Yeah, of course he can. Send him on in." And 2 or 3 days later, this 1956 white Bentley pulls up outside, which catches my attention. Who in Southern California is driving a 1956?
Right.
That's awesome style. That is so cool. And then this guy walks in. He throws a record onto my desk, sits in the chair, puts his feet on my desk, and the very first words out of his mouth were not, "Hello, how do you do? I'm Don Dawkin." His first words out of his mouth were, "I want you to do for me what you did for Motley Crue." At which point I said, "Well, how do you do? My name's Alan. You must be Don." And I lived with that record. It was called Breaking the Chains. I lived with it for a few days and then asked him to come back in. And I told him I couldn't sign him, that it was something that I could and should not do. And Don was a little bit apoplectic because he thought his record had better songs, was better produced, and was a better record. And he said, "You can't sign my record, but you signed fucking Motley Crue." And I looked at him and I said, "Don, how old are you?" And he was quiet for a moment and he said, "I'm 30. I said, "Exactly. That's why I cannot sign you to this little tiny label. You'll be spending the next 2 or 3 years trying to get off this label. You need to be on a major label right now. Let me see what I can do." So I immediately took his record up to Zootout and said, "You need to sign this." And he was iffy about it. He was iffy about it for over a month. And eventually I said, "Well, listen, let's see if I can get him a decent manager." And Tom had by that time introduced me to somebody called Cliff Bernstein.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent the record to Cliff, and Cliff didn't respond that strongly. But about a week later, after he'd received the record, I get a phone call from Cliff, and he's in a record store in Boston, if I remember correctly, and he's holding up the phone And he's going, "Can you hear that? Can you hear what I'm listening to?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can, Cliff." He said, "Yeah, it's that record you sent me. I walked in here and they're playing it, and it sounds great. Tell Don to call me." There was the beginning of Don's relationship with Cliff and Peter. And then when I left Greenworld after starting Enigma, I ended up moving in and sharing a house with Don. And we've been friends to this day ever since as well.
So is Don probably 5 or 6 years older than the average musician on Sunset at that time then? I mean, other than Jack, because Jack is a little older as well, right?
Don was older than Jack. I mean, Jack was what? 10 years younger than me. And Don and I were close in age.
Okay. So back then, you know, you lived it. I read about it. So everything that happened on the Sunset Strip and this and that. Was there any other bands other than, because I know your book mentions Rat, Crew, Dawkins. It also mentions Tesla as well, which is Sacramento, one of my hometowns. As I got older, was one of my hometown. So did you have anything to do with like Wasp or any of those bands, other than the ones you named in the book?
Blackie and I actually nearly worked together.
Oh, okay.
And he ended up going off with Rod Smallwood. But Blackie and I spent some time together and talking about things. And his choice to go with Rod Smallwood was very smart on his behalf. I think it was the right thing to do. Obviously, I was aware of Blackie because he would do those shows at the Troubadour,
right,
where he'd be throwing meat. Where he had a big gaslit sign that I was convinced was going to burn the place down. He had some poor girl on a rack and was beating her with, a sponge mace or something to look like a medieval weapon. Right. And she had little blood capsules in her mouth and would bite onto the blood capsules. I mean, it was all good, clean fun, I suppose. But he went off with Rod Smallwood. There were a lot of bands in those days, and there were no guarantees. I mean, for example, if I'm remembering this correctly, Floyd Rose had a band called Q5 that I thought was really strong. Mm-hmm. There was a band, oh my God, a band called Warrior, who had one of the best songs of the period. Just really powerful. And it had an intelligence to it as well. It was called Fighting for the Earth. I don't know if you know that song.
I do not.
I'll tell you what, I actually got a little band from Texas to do a version of it. And if I get your email, I'll just send you a copy of that.
Sure.
But anyway, I heard this song and I was, you're in a slightly competitive environment because you're all competing for the attention of the record companies and hoping that you can get a contract. And if they get a contract, you probably won't. In other words, if Atlantic sign Rat, they're not going to be looking around to sign a similar band at all. They're going to say, we have our particular band of this ilk, and that's where we're staying. So there was always that little bit of contention. And I heard this song, Fighting for the Earth, and I went, oh, fuck. Another real competitor. and we're going to have to fight them for a contract. They ended up getting signed by Virgin. And when I say there are no guarantees, Virgin totally fucking plowed it with this band. Completely mishandled it. Mishandled the recording, mishandled the marketing, and a really good band just evaporates and goes nowhere. And when I send you this song, Fighting for the Earth, you're going to sit there and go, how the fuck did this get screwed up?
Right. Does that happen more often than not?
I think in general, yes.
Or back in that day, I guess. I don't know what it's like today. So
I don't know what it's like today. I mean, it's kind of interesting because one of the things that I find uninspiring about today is that we have this guy and this girl, same two people, writing all the completely disposable pop songs. Taylor Swift, and I can't remember half these people's names, and it's all completely disposable, and they're all writing, and these two people are writing for all these people. And they're not artists. They're just performers. They're just entertainers. But then I have to think back and go, yeah, well, it was the Brill Building. But in the Brill Building, we had Carole King and Jerry Goffin, who actually wrote songs that had some meaning and substance to them.
Right.
And they were writing for lots of people. It's just that today nobody cares about substance at all. And who knows, that may just come down to whatever drugs people are taking.
That too. Yeah.
Denny, in the 60s, smoking dope and taking LSD was about mind expansion, about increasing your powers and resources of cognitive comprehension. We were going to step through the doors of perception and think about other people and ourselves with a little more clarity and a little more alacrity. And from what I know, which is very little, most of the people today want to take Molly and go to a techno disco and jump up and down.
Right.
It's not about the thinking.
Yeah. It's not my cup of tea.
No. And, Denny, we can thank cocaine for that. Where we might have been developing as humans, good old cocaine comes along and makes everybody an idiot.
Yes. That's funny because you're not wrong there.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to get through some of the questions that I have that I, when I was reading your book, so I guess what was the most hectic? I'm gonna jump right in. It was at GNR or Great White.
All right.
Because you wouldn't think Great White, but the stories that I've read and whatnot, you talk about Jack, and in other books they talk about Jack.
All right. Some simple snapshots real quickly,
yes.
Denny. People would ask, and have asked for years, who was the worst behaved in Guns N' Roses? And my answer would always be Jack fucking Russell. Okay. Jack made them look like amateurs. He really did. And you have to remember that back then I did not have an office. Well, I had an office, but it was a cupboard next to the garage underneath the condominium I lived in. And that's where I worked out of. I had no assistant. I had no receptionist. I worked on my own. And one of the ways I describe this is, I swear to God, this is true, Denny. There was one day at LAX, the airport, where I passed myself going in the other direction. All right. I had to be everywhere all the time, and it was exhausting at times. But, you know, it was circumstantial. It wasn't by design. Originally, Once Bitten was going to be released by Capitol on the same day that Geffen were going to release Appetite for Destruction.
Oh.
They were going to be released on the same day. I mean, can you imagine the workload?
Yes.
And I called Eddie Rosenblatt at Geffen, and I said, this is going to fucking kill me, Eddie. Give me some time. And reluctantly he said, okay, we'll pull it back a month. You can have a month on your first band, and then, you know, then we're going on with Appetite. So there was 4 weeks between those records being released, and that was a lot of stress and a lot of work. Unfortunately, the Great White record lit up at Album Radio with Rock Me. Mm-hmm. And it was released in June, and by November had gone gold. And had a good momentum. We didn't have much support from MTV, but you know, my thing was control what you can. And one of the things I like to try and control was having my bands out there and playing, because that's what bands do.
Right.
That's how you build an audience, is by going out there and being good musicians and playing worthwhile material and sending people home with a warm glow in their hearts. You know, so as they can face the day the next day and go to work and go, but we had a fucking great time last night because your boys are on the stage and they are presenting the dream. And the dream is that we don't have to all be working stiffs.
Right.
That we don't have, you know, that you can escape. The possibility is there. That's part of what a rock and roll band should be representing. Is if you dream hard enough and you have a little bit of talent, you might be able to escape. Now, the vast majority of us never get to escape, except on the nights when they get into a fucking hockey arena. I mean, hockey arenas. Good Lord. You know, nothing specific for music. Let's just put boards down on the ice and make the kids buy tickets. But in that night of, 45 minutes for the opener, 2 hours for the headliner, there's a sense of community and a sense of escape and a sense of vitality and a sense of being free almost for the night. And that's what it should be about.
Yeah. And I always enjoyed that, that, even to this day when I go to shows, it's like I can escape for 4 hours, right?
Yes.
I don't have to worry about anything. I'll go take my pictures. If I talk to bands, I'll talk to bands, or I just go watch the show. You know, and I'm okay with that. And well, I was a teenager, obviously in the 80s. So it was even better because I didn't have any other worries.
Yeah.
My worry was make it to the show on time so I can see all the bands.
Yeah. I mean, in rock and roll shows are a celebration of a community and a celebration of an idea. And that idea is the mythology of being able to escape. I mean, one of the statements that hangs around in my head is from Rockefeller. The Rockefellers, who are hugely wealthy people. And this particular Rockefeller said, I do not want educated people. I want workers.
Right.
All right. And that's the man. And that's who most of us have to deal with. And a little bit of rock and roll.
Yep. I mean,
it helps us get by that. I mean, in terms of community, I mean, for me, bear in mind that I'm old, ancient, and in the way now. But my formative years were kind of like 1964 to 1974. And that coincides with, Rubber Soul with the Beatles,
Right.
where for me, they stopped being entertainers and started to be artists.
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to comprehend what Bob Dylan's all about, and you figure out, as an artist, he has the ability to speak truth to power and to put power in truth. So with that, our little amusement of rock and roll, what we have is something that suspends alienation and brings people together. And here's the kicker: by their own consent. We live in a coercive world. The IRS, state laws, federal laws, church rules, family rules, so on and so forth. But when you pick up the guitar and play me a song, and I recognize the spirit of the song, the intelligence of the song, and the heart of the song, then that's when we have a willing bridge of humanity and understanding between us, not coerced.
Right.
And that's what sucked me in with all this rock and roll, and got me excited. I mean, just, the sight of two Marshall cabinets with a Marshall head on the top of it was intoxicating to me. To see that, to be able to go into a music store and pick up a guitar was almost religious. And in fact, as you'll find in the book, there was one moment where I met with Jimi Hendrix's dad in Seattle. And down in the basement of his bungalow he was living in at the time, there was one room that had, I think, 3-4 posters up that predated his solo career. And there were 3 guitars in the room. For me, that was almost like being in the most secret chamber of the Vatican.
Right.
It was that intense to me. And I turn around and I go, may I? Yeah, sure. Pick them up, And you play a few chords and you're sitting there and going, fuck me, Jimmy's hands were here.
Mm-hmm.
It's, for me, that's a religious experience.
Yeah, I have that same experience kind of, but mine was with Kathy Rhodes. Um, I got to know her quite a bit when I was living in LA. And so, and she let me, you know, she let me check out all of Randy's stuff.
Wow.
I mean, it's still in cases, and I wasn't going to touch anything anyway. But it was the fact that there's a lot of people in this world, and she let me. She took on to me quite a bit. Not like, like,
yeah.
It was just more like a friendship, and I don't understand. I can't explain it. And it was very cool. I was like taken back. I was like, oh my gosh, So, and then they end up having on his birthday, I believe. It's the birthday or the day he died. They do that thing at their winery, and she invited me down there, and she was making sure I was coming, to go and watch this little private show. And it was just amazing. And it was one of them days where I could have taken as many pictures as I wanted, and I didn't take a damn picture. I was just so in awe,
Oh, Denny, you wanted to be there.
Yes. I wanted to be in the moment.
Exactly. The minute you put a camera up in front of your face, there's a wall between you and what's going on.
Yes.
And you're going through a function. The fact that you didn't take any photographs tells me that you just wanted to be there and feel it and sense it and take that memory home with you.
Yeah. And, and Frankie Benali was there, and
Frankie was a lovely guy.
Yeah. I only met him once, and this was a while back. And I always like Frankie. Rudy, I've met Rudy as well. talked over the years, and it's just some of them things that I just
Rudy's
blows
another
me away.
lovely person. Rudy and his wife, I'm very, very fond of the pair of them.
And imagine, if I could name off 20 people and you go, oh, yeah, I know. So I was just one of them things that I can relate to that whole thing being. My dad would have loved to be in that room, just so you know. My dad, his favorite guitar player is Jimi Hendrix. So growing up, my dad played guitar and whatnot, and so
for me, there's Jimi Hendrix, and then there's everybody else.
Yes, that's my dad. Same way.
Yeah, Jimmy is head and shoulders above everybody.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, even for Father's Day this past, I bought him a Jimi Hendrix shirt because every couple of years I bought him a Jimi Hendrix shirt just because,
Awesome.
So I guess, are you still close with Bobby Blotzer as well?
Close. He lives in California. I live in Arizona. We haven't seen each other for a long time. But when we get on the phone, it might just as well have been yesterday that I last saw him. All right.
Okay.
We still converse in the same way to each other. It's very direct. It's very blunt. And I mean, this is a guy who, my doorbell would go at 4 o'clock in the fucking morning. I'd go downstairs. I have to go into an office and do some, serious work in a few hours' time. And I go down to my front door, and there would be Bobby standing there with 2 huge styrofoam cups full of alcohol and maybe a tiny bit of juice. And he's standing there and he's going, I brought one for you. Let's go play pool. Because I had an outhouse, a building in the yard where I had a pool hall in it, a pool table in it. And Bobby and I spent many, many hours playing pool together in there. And the best thing about it was separate from the house.
Oh, okay.
So Bobby and I could go in there and we could play pool. We'd turn up the jukebox. We'd get lit. We'd howl harmonies to Elton John, which was our guilty pleasure.
Right.
Was Elton John. That. And it didn't disturb the wife and the kids because it was a separate building from the house. So Bobby and I used to spend many a night in there.
So I know you said that he's got a larger life personality.
Oh, yeah.
And so I never met Bobby. But so why do you think is that the reason why him and Steven or him and Warren and those guys can't get it together to do something? Or is it just more than that? Or is it money and contracts?
It's everything, Denny. They're addicted to fighting amongst themselves. They really are. I think when we lost Robin, that the chemistry of the band became irredeemably damaged. I tend to look at bands as like molecules. Lots of different parts. Not every part has the same function. Not every part is the same size. Not every part has the same potency. But if you take just the smallest part out of that molecule, it collapses. And that's an allegory that I've had for bands for years. And losing Robin, I think, was damaging beyond repair in terms of the dynamics of the personalities within the band and so on and so forth.
Do they point fingers?
They point fingers?
Yeah, like if you would have done this, Robin would still be here, or kind of like that stuff.
No. Robin died of an illness,
Right.
suffice to say. And that wasn't anybody's fault. It's just, that's life, and there are no guarantees in life. I mean, somebody was asking me the other day, have you ever noticed any bands that, should have done better and didn't do better? And I said, yeah, countless.
There's a million of those ones.
Yeah, and yet there are bands where the ambition exceeded the talent. Motley Crue.
Mm-hmm.
All right, as far as I'm concerned, that's a triumph of ambition over talent. Tommy is a fucking amazing rock and roll drummer. He really is. So is Bobby Brodson for that moment. He's a really good rock and roll drummer. And that's your foundational aspect of everything. That's what you're going to build everything on. So if you've got a really good drummer, you've got a chance of getting a decent song constructed.
Yes, and that I was going to bring it to that because one of my favorites was always Steven, right? Huh. I love Steven's playing. I love his snare. I just love the way, and he doesn't have a big kit. It's simple kit, and he's good with his timing. He's not. I won't say he's not going to be spinning 360s in the air. He's not the best drummer, but he's a solid drummer, and he's got rhythm. He knows what he's doing. Even to this day, after a stroke, if you go watch him, he's good.
Denny, I see it a different way. The thing for me with Steven was that he had such a love of being in his band, and that exuberance informed his feel. Now, was he the greatest technical drummer in the world? No, he wasn't. In fact, Duff, when recording Appetite, was showing him what to play most of the time.
Oh, really?
when they were doing basic tracks. But Steven had two things. He had an incredible, passionate energy that he brought to his playing, and he could swing. And for me, after Steven has gone from GNR, they have never replaced him with a drummer who can swing. All the drummers that have replaced Steven are two-dimensional drummers. They're thumpers. They've got concrete hands. They may have good timing, but they can't swing. They have heavy hands. And that's what's missing from the feel of GNR, as far as I'm concerned, is his swing and his exuberance.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's when Steven was dismissed. That's pretty much when I checked out. I mean, I still like them; they're okay, but GNR was the shit for me. They pretty much took over the cruise spot when they came out. I was just like, okay, I loved everything about them, Right. And then once Steven was gone, I was like, it doesn't sound the same, and it never has sounded the same, like you said. So, is there a reason why they won't bring him back? I mean, they brought in Duff and they brought in Slash. They were just as messed up as he wasn't? I mean, as far as that goes. So, or is there some animosity there that they just don't want to deal with?
Obviously, I'm probably speculating here a little bit. And in terms of, Duff had chronic alcoholism and Slash had his addictions and so on. But both of them were able to, at the 11th hour, pull it out and function in the studio. And as far as I was concerned, the critical conversation was with Slash, who was his boyfriend, his boyhood friend. And Slash said, we're going to have to replace him because he can't play the longer songs the same way twice. And someone else is going to have to record them. So that was that's that perception that I have in terms of competence and control of addiction. And with Axel can be, or is, a rather mean person. He's the master of the grudge. He takes the time to write down all the slights that he thinks he's endured in a book and keep them and polish them like ornaments. He's obviously got control issues.
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah. I have had countless people around me use the terminology of he's a sociopathic narcissist. And part of me goes, yeah, because he's a rock and roll frontman, and you kind of need an aspect of that in a rock and roll frontman. But there's also my private thought of, yes, he is. This is the guy who coerced the name out of Duff and Slash and took control of the trademark and the name by saying, I'm not going to do any more shows unless you sign it over to me. That, I think, manifests a sense of a control issue.
Yeah.
You know, and
I would think there'd be resentment there.
I think there has been resentment there. I think Duff actually writes about his resentment there in his own book. He states it clearly that he's upset about it. You know, but on the other hand, they all get to a point of going, you know, Axel worked through his solo career because Chinese Democracy is a solo record.
And it's not even a good one. Just, I'm going to put that on record. I don't like that record at all.
Well, for me, I find it tedious, you know, and the extraordinary thing is that, and people thought that I would want or care about such things. I think I had all of Chinese Democracy on disc 2 years before it came out, 3 years before it came out. I mean, it was leaking all over the place.
Right, I remember that.
And, you know, I'm pretty straightforward about it. For me, the Guns N' Roses that I was associated with was Izzy's fucking band. That he was, to me, the most critical element of the molecule. That his rhythm playing, that his incontrovertible, streetwise vernacular lyrics were brilliant. And I was so envious of the way he wrote, you know, because I was writing for Great White and I'm looking at what he's writing and going, fuck, that's great. I love that. And you take Izzy out of that GNR and it's not the GNR that I knew by a long shot anymore. Anyway, where were we going down the rail tracks? I just jumped on the rail tracks.
Going down the rabbit hole. Just with Steven, whether do you think they'll ever? I mean, they've let him play a couple shows, or actually not even a full show. I think they come and let him play a couple tracks here and there, but he's pretty much. I won't go see him unless there's a full.
Listen, let's sum it up really quickly. Guns N' Roses is Axl's world, and they just live in it.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
There it is.
So, and in your book, you talk about how you had aligned them with certain tours, whether with Aerosmith, Iron Maiden. I almost bought my tickets for GNR and Iron Maiden, but I knew that there was a track record of them canceling. So I waited, and I'm kind of glad I did.
Smart.
Because now was their canceling, was that all Axl just not showing up?
Well, for example, I get a phone call from Izzy on the first date. And I go, Iz, what's up? And he goes, Niv, they got all these fucking cardboard icebergs on the stage, and the fucking singer is wearing a Viking helmet. What the fuck are we doing out here? It wasn't all just Axl. It was, no, this is not going to work. And going with Iron Maiden was, on my part, an act of, well, fucking Jimi Hendrix played with the Monkees.
Right.
Okay.
And that
we need to be out there supporting the record, because if we're not out there supporting the record, we may lose the record company's determination and drive behind the record. We need to be out there performing. And if it's not a perfect match, we're still getting an hour of their audience. And I have faith in my band to convert an Iron Maiden audience into a GNR audience. But Izzy and Axl and Duff, no doubt, all decided, oh, Axl's got throat problems, we're coming home. Which, to me, I'm going, fuck, that was my last tour, because we were going to be going opening for AC/DC until the riots in Phoenix. And at that point, it left only one tour that was going out there that we could get on and keep supporting and driving the record. And that was Aerosmith. And thank God they were on the same label as us. And thank God that David Geffen scared the living shit out of everybody. And thank God that when I went to Eddie Rosenblatt and David Geffen and said, I need the Aerosmith opening slot, they went to Tim Collins and said, guess what? You're taking GNR out. You know, that's the only way we were going to get on there, because Tim was trying to run a sober and clean tour.
Right.
And I'm going to bring my crew, their tour buses, backstage. Tim was terrified that he was going to lose control of his band's sobriety. But, you know, the irony of all that, Denny, is when I look back over history, and time gives you objectivity. But as I look back, that to me is the magic moment of the band, is that Aerosmith tour. That's when they were incendiary night after night. That's when every time I went to a show, the entire audience would be standing on their seats while the opener's playing.
Yes, because that doesn't happen often.
No. And that's the magic moment of the band.
So, and another magic moment to me, in my eyes, is Live at the Ritz. And I have some questions about that, just because the one that aired on MTV, I heard there was 2 nights, not just the one night.
No, it was one night.
It was just one night, because
it was February 2nd, 1988. It was a Tuesday.
you got a better memory.
And the ticket price, guess how much do you think the ticket price was?
Back then, I'm going to say less than $20.
$13.50.
Yeah. Well, because I've heard like Eddie Trunk talk about being there. And was this a showcase? Because obviously MTV's there. You know, you got.
What happened was that I was very upset with MTV because they had completely ignored one of my bands and hardly done anything for the other one. And I was pissed. And John Kennelly, who was VP of programming, called me and he said, listen, let me make it up to you. You can bring Great White out to New York and we will film them, and we will put on a Great White special live on MTV. And of course, I said, good, fabulous. By the way, I'm bringing my other band. They're going to open, okay? And Kennedy said, okay, fine, you can have the opening band too. So that's how it started out. And I'd had Great White and Guns N' Roses play together at a charity event at the Santa Monica Civic, and that had gone fine. And I thought, I'm going to have the pair of them play together in New York. Oh, what a great fantasy. Maybe I might even get to have both of them play together in London, which for me would be just a little bit of a thrill. LA, New York, and London.
Yeah.
The bands play together. That's cool. So anyway, GNR were the opening band on the night. Come the night, we'd started to get, we'd probably had 2 or 3 weeks of airplay with Jungle on MTV, and the buzz was beginning to go. And the buzz was definitely beginning to be heard amongst the executives, the record company executives in New York. And when I assessed the room, it was clear to me that more people were there because they wanted to see what Guns N' Roses were than wanted to see what Great White were. Most people knew what Great White were because Great White had been around since 1983.
Right.
Okay. So I went to the White ones and I said, I want you to seriously think about this. I want you to let Guns N' Roses close tonight. And the White ones, bless their hearts, usually did everything I asked them to do. And I said, what's the rule? This is the way I was going to try and make it unpainful for them. Always be a hard act to follow,
Right.
then follow a hard act. Okay? Now you go out there and you play first. At the end of Great White set, Slash came into their dressing room and goes, fuckers, that was fucking amazing. How the fuck are we supposed to follow that? Well, they did. And in the book, there's a little section where I go, if you're not sure about who I'm talking about or what I'm talking about, here are some points of reference. And for both those bands, that's a point of reference. They were both stellar that night. And if you want to know what Guns N' Roses were all about to me in the early days, that's film and the moment.
So did they not film Great White?
Oh no, both bands are filmed.
Where I've never seen the Great White one.
Oh, it's out there. You can find it on YouTube.
Really?
Yep.
And this is well before, obviously the Unplugged, right? This is well before all that.
Yeah.
So the reason why I was asking, I thought it was 2 nights, is because I have these CDs that I bought, and either the tracking is different, and they're live at the Ritz. They say live at the Ritz, and it's from GNR, whoever did it. It's an extended edition, but the track listing is different. And then he talks about when he fell into the crowd, and he said, the last time I was here, I fell into the crowd. When I'm like, well, wait a minute, the one I watched, he did fall into the crowd. So I'm just kind of wondering if there was more than one show. And
there might have been a later gun show at the Ritz. I would have to go back.
Was that the first time they played at the Ritz?
Yes,
the one that was filmed.
Yeah, when Great White and GNR both played together, that was the first time that both of them had played the Ritz.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and I remember a night when GNR played I think it was called the Limelight, and it had formerly been a church. And I remember that because behind the stage were steps up, a balcony, and steps down built into the building itself rather than being part of the set. So I was up there watching what was happening. And Slash, for whatever reason, was in a certain state of mind. And he went to the front of the stage anticipating a solo, and he turned around and he looked up at me, and he had this shit-eating grin on his face, and then he just went backwards into the crowd, and that was it. That was it for the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
he was done.
He was done.
Man. And it, you know, and it bums me out because I feel like when did you leave? Were you 91, 92?
March of 91.
91? Because I feel like a lot of potential was lost. A lot of good albums, you know, you got what? How many years were gone, you know, after Use Your Illusion, and then they came out with the Spaghetti Incident, and it was pretty much done.
Yeah.
And they haven't come out with anything original.
Denny, why do you think that is?
Well, we know that it's an Axel issue, I think. That's my opinion.
Yeah, Axel, it's an Axel and Izzy issue. The stupidest, dumbest thing that Goldstein and the new band attorney, Michel Anthony, who replaced Peter Paterno, the dumbest thing that those two cooked up together, and I think they cooked it up together in an intimate circumstance, the dumbest thing was losing Izzy. How do you lose Izzy out of Guns N' Roses? He left 3 months after I did. That was so fucking inept and incompetent on the part of Goldstein and Michel Anthony. Pair of fucking moronic idiots.
Well,
they lost years of creativity.
Yes.
Because Izzy was gone.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say they lost you as well, because I think you were kind of like the glue holding a lot of it together. Just reading your book and some of the other interviews I've watched you in, you're very vital into keeping things together. And that I can't say how difficult that must be.
That's part of what you're supposed to do.
Yeah,
you know, people talk about management, and I go, listen, if you think management starts at 10:30 in the morning once you've been to Starbucks, and you knock off at 6 and go off for drinks and dinner, you're not really in the game. Because management, if you're doing it, is a way of life. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 366 days of the year. All right. It's a way of life. It's not a common occupation. It's that if you're into it, if you're into having that function, then it's rock and roll is not something that you come with a time card and stamp in and then stamp out.
Right.
It's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of getting through life. For me, rock and roll is like malaria. It's always, Denny, in the fucking bloodstream. The difference is, do you sometimes have a fever or do you not have a fever? But that condition is always in your bloodstream. And it just so happens that I know the mosquito that fucking bit me and gave me that condition. It was 1959, probably 1960, 1959. Little black 7-inch piece of plastic that was called Apache and it was by a British instrumental band called The Shadows. And there was something about that guitar tone and the vibe of that guitar and the way the guy played that obviously I never recovered to this day.
I mean, yeah, you definitely got bit by the bug, because
Yeah.
I reading your book and whatnot, and I'm like, I don't think I'd have put up with half that shit. I'd be like, you know what, you got between Jack and Axel, I don't know. I'm just like, I don't think so. You know what I mean?
Denny, there was a point in time when I'd have willingly killed not Axel, but Jack.
Yeah.
For some of the things that he did, including
the bus.
And how about having an affair with my wife for 13 years?
Well,
My wife,
yeah, that'll do it too. I did read that as well.
That'll do it too. But, you know, in the end, we found that our friendship survived all that. And all that was something that we laughed about in our last phone calls together before he passed. That we found that our relationship and our friendship superseded it all. And we could laugh about all the craziness and the stupidity. And we could also say to each other, you know, we put a pretty good catalog of songs together.
We did. Seriously.
Yeah, we did okay.
I got to see them, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before he passed. It was well documented when I saw him that he had fell on stage. And I remember I came home and I was talking to my wife, and I'm like, you know, he fell, I'm like, he didn't look right. And, and
was that one of the gigs he was doing with Don?
No, he was doing it with
Slaughter,
Warrant, Firehouse, and Lita Ford.
Oh, okay. Because Don told me he did a gig with him just before the end, and Don, with his sense of drama, claims it's the last show he did. I don't know.
And it could have been. I mean, but the cool thing was I do have a recording, because I got there right when they were doing sound check, and man, he still sounds good. I'll tell you what, I mean, just prop him up and let him sing, But
you know what I think? You know what I know? He was hoping to go on stage.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's what he wanted. Yeah, that's what he wanted.
But
to go to gig.
So were you? I'm going to take you back here. Were you with them as well? Were you managing them when he robbed the house and shot the maid?
That was just before my time. But I did have to. Jack pressed on me. He wanted me to turn up for what was some sort of probationary hearing. Now, he had submitted in writing to the court that he wanted to be a rock and roll singer. And quite obviously, these citizens of Orange County took a dim view of this and thought, you want to be a rock and roll singer and you're shooting people and you're a drug addict? We don't think so. We think we'll send you away. So, and I think this is the last time I ever did this. I actually went and got a haircut and pulled out a suit and put on a suit and tie with a fresh haircut and went to the probationary hearing. And when they brought up this issue, Jack turned around and said, could my manager please speak on my behalf? And of course, I stood up, and with my best PBS diction, my best Downton Abbey accent, I told them that Mr. Russell is undoubtedly going to have an exceptional career in the entertainment industry. And with an accent like that, and a suit and a tie and a haircut, they don't disagree. And
Apparently not.
they stamp his paperwork, and I can start working with Jackie.
Wow. I mean, that's crazy that you can get away with that. And along with Vince's, car crash, Brett Michaels had his car crash. It was pretty well documented as well. And nobody does hardly any time. And there's a lot more stories, I'm sure.
Oh, Denny, come on. I mean, where are you located?
I'm in Kansas City right now, but.
Yeah, but you spent time in LA. What is LA known for? It's an entertainment place. All right. There is no better place to fuck up if you're an actor or a musician than LA, because there are judges there who understand that you are part of the machinery, and that you being in jail means that you're not being productive and you're not generating income for the big machine.
For the money. Right? Yeah.
So obviously, when Vince Neil, two were maimed and one died.
Yeah.
And he had 18 months in jail. Well, I wonder how big the brown paper bag was that went to the judge that was full of green.
Yeah, I mean, we all knew that there's money involved, right? I mean, that was a given. I think everybody was like, "Wow,
Well, let's roll it on. Doc McGee gets nailed for an 18-wheeler full of weed. Oh, we know how we're going to slap his hand. He's got to go to Moscow and put on a rock and roll show.
With all his artists.
Yeah. Everybody else would have been sent to Devil's Island for 20 years. Yes. Doc just has to go to Moscow.
And apparently Doc has a documentary coming out for that. I'd seen an interview with him, and I'm still waiting because I didn't know those were 2 days either. I didn't know that was a 2-day festival. I paid for one that wasn't even probably worth what I paid for, because they only did a few songs, and it's kind of but anyway, that's a whole nother story. So I was gonna ask you, so how did they exactly, Doug Goldstein and Michelle Anthony, how'd they end up pushing out? Was it an Axl thing, or was it a label thing?
It could have been all of it. All right. Axl was banning me from being on the tour or complaining about me. I mean, it was constant.
That drives me crazy when I was reading that. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Constant. Okay. He was always complaining. And if you read Slash's book, he makes it plain that he understood that Doug Goldstein definitely wanted to usurp the brass ring. And then I had just brought in Michelle Anthony to replace Peter Paterno as band counsel. And she and Doug start getting cozy together. So they're thinking, let's get rid of him. I'm the lawyer. You're the manager. We're the power couple. Neither of them thinking it through, and neither of them having the capacity to hold the thing together. And Geffen didn't care. David Geffen didn't care at that point because of two reasons. One, I'd made him agree to renegotiate their contract. And whatever Goldstein says, Goldstein had nothing to do with that whatsoever. Okay. So that's just bullshit and lies from him. And David was selling the company to Matsushita, I think it was, Japanese firm. David's concern was to get the records delivered and sold before he sold the company, because he wanted to profit on the sale of those two records and let Matsushita be left with holding the bag of paying the royalties once they bought
the
company. Got me?
Yeah.
So David didn't care if I was around or not, and maybe David contributed because he was pissed I made him renegotiate.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too, because
but it's all of them. It's all four of them.
yeah,
And David didn't care because he was moving on. I'm not going to be bothered with making records anymore. I want to go and make movies because I can make a lot more money on a good movie than I can on a good record.
yes,
That
true.
was his thing. And, so he didn't care if I were around. He didn't care if G&R broke up. He wanted those 2 records and get them sold before he sold to Matsushita.
Right. And I love the fact that you went in there and renegotiated that contract and
Nobody
pretty
knew I
much
was doing
said
it.
screwed Don Henley because that guy's an asshole. Good music, but he's an asshole. So I was like, wow.
Nobody knew what I was doing because I didn't trust Goldstein. I didn't trust Michelle at that point. And do you think I'm going to have a band meeting and sit them down and say, guess what? I'm going to go in and try and get your contract renegotiated after watching and hearing about Howard Kaufman and Tim Collins failing to do that for Aerosmith and Whitesnake. I'm not going to sit them down and say, this is what I intend to do and this is how I'm going to do it.
Right.
Because loose lips. And if I fail, I'm going to go back to my band and said, well, it was worth a try, but I failed. All right. I just did it quietly in my own way, on my own, and it worked.
And it worked big time.
Yeah. And the gratitude I get is to be fired. There's a little thing. What we have here is failure to appreciate.
That's the truth.
That's the end of it right there. No appreciation. How many times do you think Axl ever took me aside and said thank you?
I'm going to guess 0.
Well done. You're
or at least 1, right?
No.
None at all?
No, he never took me aside and said thank you for anything ever. When I was fired, I got a phone call from Izzy and he's going, you want to come up and ride bikes? Because occasionally we'd ride bikes together. And I go, yeah, of course I do. We're still going to be friends, whatever. I'll come up. And I go up to Izzy's house in Laurel Canyon and there are 3 brand new Harleys outside his house. And he goes, which one? And I'm thinking, well, this is pretty cool. I choose one to ride today. Why do you need 3, Izzy? We only need 2. Is anybody else coming? And he goes, which one? And I go, well, that one looks pretty cool. Let me ride on that one. He said, it's yours. That was his divorce.
That's a nice gift.
That was his divorce present to me. I rode home on a brand new Harley.
He was the only one?
To give me a Harley? Yes.
No, to say anything to you, Slash never said anything, Duff, or
no, they
Steven.
disappeared. They disappeared for 7 years. And then I started getting phone calls from Slash and Duff, and they said, come to LA, we want to talk to you. And I went into LA, and they were putting a thing together under the name The Project. And we had a dinner meeting at the Hamburger Hamlet, just off Sunset. And Duff was the last to arrive. And as he's sitting down at the table, he looks at me and he says, well, what about it, Niv? In other words, we want you to manage the project.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not thrilled with the idea for a number of reasons. One, because it would be convening everybody except Axl, which I thought would be problematic in people's perceptions. I did not have infrastructure at that point because I wasn't managing anything else at that moment. And I had some creative things that I wanted to do for myself. And I just thought, I'm not sure. And then Izzy disappeared out of the project. And when Izzy disappeared out of the project was when I went, you know what, guys? You need to go with someone else, not me.
So they say why Izzy left? Because this is Velvet Revolver, right?
This is Velvet Revolver.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna be honest with you, that was not one of my faves.
I'm sorry to say it, but their frontman, the singer, to me was a fake.
See, I was never a fan either.
Yeah,
So.
I could never connect to what he was saying, how he was saying it, what he was doing. You know, he was making all the rock and roll moves without them being driven by a rock and roll substance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when Axl writes the lyric to Jungle or to Civil War, there's a cohesive intelligence behind those songs. You know, and
I would agree. Those are deep lyrics.
And you can go with those. But the project to me was, and losing Izzy was critical because Izzy would have been the one who would have provided the songs that would have been worthwhile. All right. But the rest of them were all going through, as far as I was concerned, we're all going through rock and roll motion.
Yeah.
Without having rock and roll substance. And I've never been in it for the money. I'm one of those ridiculous,
The money comes later.
infantile individuals who's in it for the excitement.
Yeah. Well, you sure got it. I'm telling you that right now. Between those two bands.
Yeah.
So how did you feel, or did you even notice the extreme? Because it seems like, I don't want to say it's overnight because I know it wasn't overnight, when GNR blew up, right? And it's just bam, they're everywhere. Great White is still out there, they're still doing well, but Guns N' Roses is just taking off. Like, they're becoming the biggest band in the world.
Denny, it's a phenomenon.
Yeah. Right? Definitely, for sure.
Yeah. Everybody tries to construct a phenomena, but you can't, because in a genuine phenomena, there is an unknown quality. And the unknown quality with GNR and being a phenomena is that they got such an incredible blue-collar working class response that none of us could predict. And right band at the right moment too.
Yeah. Did you notice at the time with everything going, or did it seem like it happened like you're being booked, you're being played overnight, you're doing this, or was it a slow growth after that first year?
It was a 2-year overnight success. I started working with them in the late summer of 1986.
Okay.
And then it blows up in the early spring of 88. There was a lot of work and a lot done in that period of time.
Yeah.
And it was done with the intention of not creating a phenomena, because you cannot create a phenomena. A phenomena like that only forms spontaneously, or it doesn't. You cannot contrive it. And there were moments where you went, oh, hello. You know the legend of Sisyphus? It's the guy who's pushing the rock up the mountain.
Yes.
And he has to keep pushing the rock up the mountain. And then one day he actually gets to the top of the mountain. The fucking rock goes scurrying down the other side of the mountain. Right. He's got to run after it. Well, there was something of the legend of Sisyphus about this, because we're pushing. We're trying to keep going. We're trying to push. We're trying to get to the next level. And then suddenly it takes off. And one day you're sitting in a car in Manhattan and you're headed down to Electric Ladyland Studios. And as you're coming down to 8th Street and about to turn left, you become aware that there are people running after the car because they've spotted Slash sitting next to you. And you go around the corner, you get out of the car, you get the door open to Electric Lady, and then Slash can get out of the car and zip across the sidewalk and get into the safety of the studio, and you close the door and lock it. And you look at each other and you go, wow, that's weird.
Yeah.
And that's the moment where you know things have changed.
Yes.
And it's changed. And Denny, it's changed on every level.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know, how people talk to you, why people talk to you, when they talk to you.
And is it, can you get me this? Can you get me that as well?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely a lot of that and a lot of ingratiation. And, you know, I've made this comment to one or two people and they kind of understand it. The more people I was surrounded by, the lonelier I was.
You know, I've heard that mainly not so much tour managers, but like musicians as well. When it happens, fame, right? They're around about all these people, and yet they feel the loneliest. You know, which reason why they lead to alcohol and drugs, right? That's one leading cause.
Well, that's part of it.
And everybody wants a piece of you, right? Everybody wants a piece of the action, I guess you'd say. No pun intended.
Yeah. The association, the ability to name drop, all that craziness. And there's no school for it. You can't go to university and do Fame 101.
Yeah.
There's no school for it at all. Like there's no school for management. You can't go and do Management 101. And one of the reasons is the industry doesn't want educated managers.
Yeah.
The establishment in the industry, Denny, is the labels, the accountants, and the lawyers. And they want disposable management of little experience, because most of the time you're the enemy. You're trying to protect your clients to over exploitation by the establishment.
Okay, that makes sense. But I would think you'd want to work hand in hand, just because.
Yeah, you do. You have to work really well with these people, and at the same time, they're the enemy. You know, you got to be able to go out and have dinner with the wives.
Yeah, right.
You know, and have a really nice time and be very pleasant to each other. And then, you know, watch like hell when the accountings are being done, or when you're going, I need X amount of dollars for a video, and they're going, well, we'll give you that amount, but if you spend more than that amount, it's 100% recoupable. And you're going, wait a minute, this is marketing. You know, you're fighting those battles all the time. But
so now that you bring that up, so when they do a video and then they consider it marketing, is that considered a write-off? Can they write that off? I'm sure they did, but I mean, legally.
I can't remember exactly, but I mean, it was common back in the day that you either had to have half of the cost of the video recoupable against your record royalties, or all of the cost of the video recoupable against your record royalties. And then they'd decide how much they would give you to speculate in the manufacture of a video. Mm-hmm. The amount of money that I was given for Sweet Child was half what Geffen put up for Jungle. And Jungle, I had to film on the back of a Great White video to amortize the costs through both videos.
Oh, really? Okay.
So as I could get the storyboard that I wanted for Jungle filmed. So, I mean, you know, this kind of thing is going on all the time. And of course, the joke of it is, there was Sweet Child. I got 2 edits.
Was there 2 or 3?
2.
Okay, I thought there was 3.
No,
but
there were 2. The primary edit was Nigel Dick, you do your primary edit that you want to do, which was a combination of both color and black and white. And then I said, once you've done that, I wanted you to look at all the black and white footage that we have left over. And I want to construct a black and white video with one color shot at the end.
I remember that one as well.
Yeah. And the reason we could do that was because Nigel, bless his heart, came up with a fucking brilliant idea, because we were scared that we were not going to be able to get enough image on film to get a decent edit with the amount of money that Geffen gave us and the amount of film that we could buy and all the other costs and so on and so forth. So Nigel said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have a grip whose one job for the whole night is going to be loading a 16 millimeter Bolex. In fact, I'm going to get 2 or 3 Bolexes and have a grip, keep them loaded, so that anybody on the set can pick up one of those Bolexes and shoot what they think looks good. And that way we may get enough B-roll for the edit. Well, it turned out we got enough B-roll to get a whole second video, which was awesome. It was brilliant on Nigel's part. Great piece of thinking.
Yeah, that's probably where, like, you know, and obviously when one person does it, other bands follow, right? I mean, I think Bon Jovi did that as well later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy. Crazy. So I want to talk a little bit about Q Prime. Because I can't remember. You mentioned it in your book. Who started Q Prime?
That's Cliff Bernstein and Peter Mensch's company.
Okay.
And they did Def Leppard. They still do Metallica.
Right. So who was their first artist?
I could be wrong on this, but I think they started out with Def Leppard.
Okay. Yeah, because I didn't realize that Q Prime was that early. Yeah. I mean, I knew that they managed Metallica, and you know, I could name off 100 bands. So could you? But I didn't realize they started out in the 80s like that, and I had no idea. So that's crazy. That see, and like I said, you know, you've touched pretty much everything in that industry, indirectly or directly. And do you feel like you shaped any of that? I mean, as far as like how things are run or how things are
Denny,
done.
come on. Let's take a surfing. Let's take a surfing analogy. Not that I can surf, although Izzy once bought me a surfboard, hoping to get me out on the ocean. Didn't happen. Anyway, I've had an incredible experience, starting from when I became the van driver gopher for Virgin back in 1974. I had a year when I had a radio show on WINC Zeta 4 in Miami. Obviously, I can write. Obviously, I've learned some studio craft. With Greenworld, I've started doing their sales and marketing. I was doing sales and marketing for Virgin at some one point. It's been an incredibly broad experience. And part of that is understanding the power of the word yes, which is something I learned at Virgin, because there were only about 24 of us when I started working there. And we promoted from within. So if somebody asked you to do something, you said, yes, done. I'll get it done for you. Then you went out of the office, closed the door, and freaked out and went, how the fuck am I going to do this? All right. And tried to figure it out. But that was how you progressed at Virgin, was by saying yes. So that became part of my consciousness of saying yes. And in terms of shaping things, if you're a surfer, you don't shape the wave, Denny. You ride it.
Okay.
Okay. What you do, if you have a little bit of skill, is recognize which wave you should get on. And I was quite good at doing that. But basically, I was one of those who was in the right place at the right time, the early 80s in Los Angeles, when the last wave of rock and roll came through. I mean, there was, Don Dawkins, Motley, Rat, Great White. Then others started popping up, Black and Blue and Warrior and so on and so forth. At the beginning of the 80s, there was nothing much going on.
Van Halen?
Well, they're late 70s.
Yeah, I guess 78, 79.
Yeah, they're late 70s. But, in terms of bands being signed, it wasn't happening. And, this well of energy and creativity was, subterranean, but it eventually got to the surface and blew open. And we, you got to tip your hat to Quiet Riot. Not a fan. Kevin Dubrow, I thought, pardon me, was not very bright. Let's put it that way. Okay.
I don't know him, so.
Yeah.
Or didn't know him.
Yeah. And I love Rudy to death. I think he's wonderful. I'm very, very fond of Rudy. But, they get a hit. And when there's a hit in a genre that nobody's been signing, suddenly all those labels on Sunset are going, okay, let's get our Quiet Riot.
Right.
Let's get our Motley Crue. Let's get our Rat. Let's get our Great White, and it blows up. But there was a sense of possibility there. And there were wonderful little moments when we seemed to be getting somewhere when it seemed impossible. For example, getting KMET to play Great White as an unsigned band. KMET didn't do that. KLOS.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that as well.
By the time we get to 1986, and I'm trying to regenerate Great White's career, we have Face the Day getting played for 16 weeks in heavy rotation on KMET, and KLOS playing it in heavy rotation for 8 weeks, and KNAC playing the entire record all the time on an independent record on my own little label. It doesn't happen. In 1986, the song of the year for KLOS was Steve Winwood, Arc of a Diver. That was their number one song for the year. Number two was a little independent band on an independent label. Great White, Face the Day, was their number two song of the year at KLOS.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, that shit doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't.
It's, it goes back to we were talking about phenomena. It happened because it was a great song, great performance, and people got excited about the discovery. It wasn't yet another act being force-fed to the market by the labels who know what the market wants. It was something that was unexpected, came out of left field, and people connected and responded to it. How can you not respond to a song when you're a working stiff and the hook is, I don't want to face?
I do that every morning.
The day.
It took me a long time to know that was a cover. I had no idea. I did not know that.
Yep.
I didn't even realize that they did. The Great White had as many covers as they did. And I will say that
do you know why?
Great White, Led Zeppelin.
That is broadening the palette of the band catalog. God bless them. Def Leppard to me are a boy band my favorite boy band of all time. They're a boy band, and there's such a similarity to everything they record. Whereas with Great White, I wanted to have the broadest possible palette of expression that we could support within the abilities that we had as a group.
Yeah, I mean, I love those. Recovery and Recovery Live are so good. Because I didn't even realize he could hit all those notes, and then you listen to the Great Zeppelin, right? And that's just I love that album too.
Jackie and I had this out not long before he passed, and I said, you should have fucking stopped. We had Since I've Been Loving You from the Rich Show, which is stunning, and then we have the Unplugged Babe.
Yeah.
Point made. You don't need to record another Zeppelin track as long as you live. There was a lovely story. There was
they're gonna do an album.
Yeah, there was a friend of mine at a party in Brazil, and he was talking to Joe Elliott and Robert Plant. And Joe Elliott, apparently, reputedly, I was told, turned around to Robert Plant and said, "Yeah, you ever heard that guy in Great White? He sounds a bit like you do." To which Robert Plant replied, "He sounds more like me than I do."
Right.
Apparently, that's a true story. I love that one.
That's a good one. So yep. I guess one of my questions I have, and maybe, did I lose you? You lose?
No, I'm there.
So Home Sweet Home Crew comes out. Do you think if that was not a hit, and that would have not, well, that obviously created the power ballad for the 80s.
Well, yes and no. It was also a steal. It's a steal from Aerosmith, Home Tonight.
Well, I mean, I get that, but I mean, do you think that would have, if that wouldn't have gotten as big as it was, do you think the 80s would have been as big as they were as far as the rock music? Or you think another band would have came in with another?
Somebody would have come up with a ballad that would have hit hard. And
because we know Journey did it. We know, Journey, things like that.
Exactly. Listen, I was at the Glendale Civic. Motley Crue were playing the Glendale Civic. And I was going to be at that gig. And I took Tom Zoot out because Tom wanted to see the band perform. And I took Tom and I introduced him. My wife at the time was Swedish. So I introduced Tom as my Swedish wife's cousin, American cousin. Okay. Because we didn't want Motley or Alan Kaufman to know that Tom was from Elektra and have Alan Kaufman go in there and fuck it all up before we had it all in place. So, anyways, Glendale Civic. I am looking at the girls there, Denny, who are stunning little Orange County, California babes in clothing that looked pre-ravished. And I'm looking at these girls and how good looking they are and how tattered and deliberately tattered their clothing is, suggesting that they've been assaulted by the Mongolese army or something. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, this band is definitely going to work, because where the girls are, and if the girls look like this, the guys are going to be there. So let's flip it to the ballads. Ballads are things that appeal to girls first. If the girls are excited about the ballad, they will want to buy the ticket. They will want to go and see the band. And the guys are going to go, yeah, I'll go with you. I want to go and see the band with you. Yeah, because where the girls are, the boys end up being too.
Yep. That's why a lot of people went to Poison shows.
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm not gonna lie, I was probably one of them guys. I'm just gonna say. So and maybe you can agree or disagree with me. My theory is, because everybody says grunge killed the 80s. I don't believe so. I believe it was not only the 80s killed the 80s, but country music killed the 80s. Because everything on the charts was
Garth
Brooks.
fucking Brooks.
Yes.
How about Garth? I'm watching
Yeah.
Garth Brooks on a TV show, on an MTV thing, and I pick up the phone and I call Bobby Bloxer and I go, "Hey, Blox, answer me a fucking question." "What up, Niv? Did you sell your staging to a fucking country artist called Garth Brooks?" "Yeah, we did. We got some good money for it." Boom.
Yep.
Garth
See,
Brooks
I'm right,
came along.
right? So I'm right. Because
Garth
all the
Brooks
girls
came along, staging, got a pyro guy in there, and started to make the 80s rock and roll show a country deal, and that hurt.
And all the girls flocked there too as well. So what happens? What we were just talking about, where the girls go, the guys go. Because people will say grunge, and I like I said, I don't believe that in a heartbeat.
Well, here's a slight shift of consideration in the theory. The other thing that I'm going to suggest, Denny, is that grunge was purely an urban phenomenon.
Well,
whereas what country did was take the rural audiences away, the middle American audiences away, the Peorian, the Oklahoma cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they were stolen by the country aspect of going hard rock. But for me, grunge was an urban phenomenon.
Yeah, because I was working in the early 90s. I was working for Bill Graham Presents, and I went to I would work like Clint Black shows. I would work Trisha Yearwood shows, and Travis Tritt and everything. And I can tell you, that played not only were they sold out everywhere, the girls were everywhere, but I would go to Alice in Chains, and it's pretty much all dudes, right?
Yes.
It's like,
yes.
So, and then you look at the charts, right? Garth Brooks is number one. Clint Black's number one. Trisha Yearwood's number one. So I always tell people, they're full of shit. They don't know what they're talking about. They can blame grunge all they want. It never was grunge. They follow the money. You got to follow the money. Because a lot of those grunge people didn't make money either. So,
Denny, here's the thing. Grunge took MTV away.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
I miss my
took MTV away, but
miss my MTV.
It was fucking Garth Brooks with rat staging
that
crazy. Doug and I. Yeah,
I never even realized that.
Yeah,
because he was the larger than life, right? He was all about the live show, the rock and roll country star.
I have to say, I don't get it. I understand the performance. I understand the staging. What I don't understand is who he is and what he's about. And there was a documentary on him recently, and I could not get into it at all. There was something empty and disconnected about him.
I don't really pay attention. I don't really, even to this day, I don't care for any of that stuff. Maybe a song or here, whatever. So I guess I'm gonna let you go here. We've been chatting for almost 2 hours, so I don't want to hold you up too much.
Well, I haven't had breakfast yet, Denny. I've got to go and get me fucking Got to go and get me fucking breakfast.
So Ozzy's retiring, right? This show's coming up. I have my issues with Ozzy as well. Most people say, he's the Godfather or he's whatever. And to me, everything that I've read and everything that I've seen, he hasn't really done much other than sing, right? He can harmonize, but he doesn't play an instrument. And it just seems like if he's on any record, or if he's lends his voice to anything, Sharon makes it that he gets a writing credit, right?
Right.
To me, doesn't that make you a fraud? I mean, don't get me wrong, because I like that
not in
stuff.
Ozzy's case, because I don't think Ozzy has a fraudulent bone in his body and doesn't necessarily know what Sharon does, because Sharon does all the fucking business.
That's
you see, and
true.
if she's fucking doing business, then I can slip off to the fridge and get myself a vodka, and she won't know. Or if I get on an aeroplane and I see Alec, as he called me, I can sit down next to Alec and I can tell Alec to get himself some vodkas and drinks that I can drink, but don't let Sharon see. Ozzy, I think, operates on a fairly simple level. I wouldn't call him a fraud. I have at times, within the safety and privacy of my own kitchen, described Black Sabbath as a one-hit wonder. But what a fucking hit! I'm
not saying nothing of it. I don't take anything against him. I'm just saying.
My wife goes batshit and goes, no, their first record was fucking brilliant. And by the way, fairies wear boots, and I'm about to kill you with mine. That's how the wife responds. But to me, Black Sabbath, I can leave after they play Paranoid, and I'm happy.
Or Iron Man?
No, it's Paranoid. And it was a time and a moment for me, in a mental condition for me. But there was that record, and there was a record called Speed King.
Well,
and those two were of a moment and a big impression on me.
Do you think? Did you know Ronnie James Dio as well?
Met him briefly, did not know him. I probably knew his wife a little bit better, because we were both contributing to a charitable thing called Children of the Night.
Okay.
And the idea of Children of the Night was to get runaways off the street of LA. And if you went to a government hostel, you had to give your name, your address, and your parents' name, and so on and so forth. So there were a lot of kids who wouldn't go to government facilities. And Children of the Night were a facility that said, no name, you don't have to tell us anything.
Okay.
Just come here and be safe. And in point of fact, I gave the Angel song of Twice Shy to that charity. So all the money that was generated by that song went to Children of the Night.
Oh, good. That's a good song too. I did.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
I made some money.
The only reason I asked about Dio is because, speaking of Ozzy and whatnot, they get inducted in the Hall of Fame. Nobody who's ever played in Sabbath other than Ozzy gets in. Dio doesn't get in. Nobody else gets in, and I that stuff bothers me as well.
Fame, who gives a shit?
Well, I know, but that's not the point.
Wrong. Why make an institution out of something that should never be institutionalized? Rock and roll is about a free spirit. It doesn't need a museum.
No, but it's nice to have one.
I don't think so.
No, I get what you're saying. And a lot of people say that as well. So
the biggest mistake, Denny, is that it's in Cleveland. They should have taken the Capitol Tower in Los Angeles.
I agree. It should not be in Cleveland, or they should create a new one.
Yeah,
a better one.
Yeah,
or not one at all. I mean, to me, I think the Grammys and the AMAs are more irrelevant than the rock and roll, even though they're all probably about the same. But
the whole thing is bullshit. It all starts with the Oscars, and the Oscars were invented so
those are horrible too.
Yeah, so as they could revitalize a movie and get more sales out of it because somebody won an Oscar for playing a part in, it's all fucking marketing bullshit. I got nominated twice in 1 year for Grammys. Do you know where I was that night? On the other side of the fucking country at one of my band's gigs. I was as far away from it as possible because I don't believe in all that crap.
So I guess, okay, I got another question. So did you ever watch The Metal Years, Decline in Western Civilization Part 2?
Oh, Penny Ferris wanted my
Yes.
dance in her movies, and I went.
I was wondering because they're on the soundtrack, but they're not in the movie.
I wouldn't let her put them in the movies.
Why is that?
Oh, you want Slash to be treated like, what was the guy's name in Wasp? The bass player.
Chris Holmes.
Chris Holmes. You want Penny Ferris to do a Chris Holmes on Slash?
No, not really. But I mean, I always wondered why they weren't in there. So yeah, I guess that makes sense, But they were on like the soundtrack for Deadpool, right? For Clint Eastwood's movie. Did you guys have anything to do with that?
Oh, by that time I had learned to figure out what the movie was going to be about and whether it was any good before I agreed to let somebody use a song in a soundtrack or for the advertising in the movie. For example, there was this race car movie with Tom Cruise and David Geffen was involved, and he wanted to use Welcome to the Jungle in it. And I told him no.
Was that Days of Thunder?
Yeah, because I found out that it wasn't a very good movie. And David went ballistic and we screamed and yelled at each other down a telephone. And then later I thought to myself, David brought us to the dance. He spent a lot of money on our debut record. We should help him out a little bit with his fucking crappy movie. So I talked with Axl, and Axl came up with the idea of doing Knocking on Heaven's Door. So we recorded Knocking on Heaven's Door for that movie. Now I get another phone call from Eddie Rosenblatt at Geffen, who's the president. He goes, Clint Eastwood wants to use a Guns N' Roses song in his movie. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, Clint, look what I'm smoking. I smoke what he smokes in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Kentucky cheroots. That's what I smoke. That's what he smokes. Anyway, I think to myself, Clint, Eastwood, Dirty Harry, what could go wrong? Of course, we'd be delighted to put a track in one of his movies. Turns out that the movie is a stinker. But this time, it worked out for us. Because what happens when they know that they're going to put a high-profile movie out with a very high-profile star, and it's not going to be good? What they want to do is they want to get people into the seats and buy tickets before the word of mouth gets out there that it's not that good a movie. So what they do is they do endless amounts of television advertising to get people into the movie fast. Mm-hmm. So suddenly, my band's song, Welcome to the Jungle, is coming out of every fucking television set across the country for a month. And it worked out for us.
It did.
That was another reason why things exploded, was because they were hammering the advertising on Deadpool and using a clip of Welcome to the Jungle. So everybody was hearing it. It was everywhere. And that was the moment when a fuck up actually worked out really, really, really well for us.
So I, for the longest time, I didn't even know they had a video for It's So Easy. I had no idea. Only because because they didn't play it on MTV. They were never going to play it on MTV. Once I seen it now, and I'm like, oh, and I didn't even know it was on. Is it even on a home video?
I have no idea what Axel put out after I left. But we were going to do It's So Easy as the last video for the album cycle for Appetite for Destruction. And part of the thinking of that was it was the first single that we put out in the United Kingdom. And we put that single out because we wanted to try and get banned by the BBC, because we weren't anticipating that it was going to get played before or after ABBA in the rush hour. All right, that wasn't going to happen. But what we did hope for is what we got. We got banned by the BBC, which gave us a little bit of street cred. We're not part of the machine. And we got some English press on it. So that all went to help. So they wanted to do It's So Easy as the last video. And that live footage from the Cat House, some of the best live footage ever filmed of the band. It was phenomenal. They were on.
It's good.
It's fucking amazing footage. And I'm thinking this is going to be a wonderful way to finish things up. But what does fucking Axel fucking do? He goes and gets Nigel Dick, and without telling me, he puts Erin in bondage and a ball gag in her mouth and slaps her ass with a paddle. And now it's a bondage video about him and Erin, and it's no longer about my fucking band.
Seems like
stupid. So as soon as I see that, I go to Geffen and I go, this is what the storyline's going to be. We're overexposed, not wishing to be funny about Erin being overexposed. But we're overexposed, so we're not going to put the video out, and we shelved it. Now come the divorce with Erin, and Erin's trying to find the footage, and he's trying to find the footage because she wants it shown in her court case, you know, along with the cover of People magazine with Stephanie Seymour and Erin on it and Axel on it, and the headline Battered Beauties.
Right.
All right. And then what is he? I mean, just Denny, is that any way to treat a sweet child?
No.
Handcuffs hanging in the door frame? No. I mean, hello.
Well, I didn't.
She's known for being his sweet child and the inspiration. And
right.
You now go back and dig out that footage and put even more bondage footage in it and put it out there. What are you fucking thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know that there was that much drama between them two. And that whole time, I had no idea, you know. I'm kind of glad I didn't. I'm kind of glad I didn't know a lot of things, you know. But you had to deal with it. I didn't have to deal with it. And that's too bad because I feel like a lot of missed opportunities, a lot of good things came. So,
Denny, what's amazing is that people still want to talk about it 30 years later.
They do, right?
What's amazing, Denny, is that you think it's worth talking about 30 years later too, and that people will be interested in listening to your conversation. You know, it's stunning. If you'd come into the studio in 1986 and said, Niv, what you're recording today is going to be on the radio in 30 years, I'd have gone, Denny,
right?
What are you snorting?
You're
what
right.
are you smoking? Because I want you to share, because if it gives you that kind of absurd optimism, I'd like a little buzz of that.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that with any of the 80s stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say I won't say just as popular because obviously they're not. But I mean, everybody knows certain songs from certain bands, and they may not be, playing stadiums or this and that, but they're relevant, I guess you'd say, you know. I can go to any classic rock and they're going to play your Skid Rows. They're going to play your Poisons. They're going to play your Guns N' Roses, Great White. So I think in the 90s when it got all trashed and, you know, it was a bad thing. And I think people are realizing it. You know, what comes around goes around, because a lot of these younger kids are finding a lot of this 80s stuff now, and they're digging it, which is crazy to me. Why?
Yeah.
Because we were the last generation to like party.
Yep.
I mean, literally, like, I mean, there was
Well,
no holds barred.
You know, they party in a different way now, and I think that's part
That's
of it.
true.
You
It's
know,
just not as fun, I don't think.
yeah.
Well, they got cameras.
I never liked disco. I never liked techno, and you know, that seems to be the absolute core and essence of the consciousness of a rave. You know,
That's
it's just
true. Yeah.
jumping up and taking Molly and jumping up and down and going woo, you know, and that's it. You know,
So,
I like to make a record that wasn't exactly like the previous record, and I like to make a record that might have a point of view that might stimulate your interest. I mean, for me, one of the best Great White records is Psycho City, and Psycho City is my condemnation of Los Angeles.
that was it.
Yeah, I mean, if you go through, you know, when the last track on Psycho City is "Get On Home," which is a little prayer that we get out of this place and maybe end up in Prescott. And there you go.
I almost moved there once.
Yeah.
So, okay, two
Denny,
final questions.
You got a final question?
Yeah. So,
okay, because I got to get some breakfast.
Sure. What do you think this will ever happen again? In our lifetime.
In our lifetimes?
Yeah.
Fuck, I don't know. I'm in the mortal zone, Denny. When I get up in the morning, I comes down to the computer here and I bring up the obituaries and I look for my name. And if I don't see it, then I go and feed all the animals. You know?
Well, there you go.
I mean, you know, almost every day you see somebody you know of, or even somebody that you know who's moved on and passed on.
That's true. Yeah.
And very much we're in the mortal zone now.
We sure are. I guess on that note, I want to thank you, Alan. I know we spent a lot of time. I could probably pick your brain for another 2 hours, and you know.
Well, it's not much in there. It shouldn't take you 2 hours.
At least not anymore. Is that what you're telling me? So, but I appreciate it. I'm going to have your publicist.
Denny, there are days when I can't remember a word. And I worry and I go, is this the beginning of
the end?
Cerebral dismantling. And then I go, no. Then I go, no, it's because your head's stuffed full of too much. Because I have my TV on 24/7 and I am absorbing documentaries and YouTube around the clock. And I take in more information now in 24 hours than I used to take in 24 months before.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's way too much. I mean, honestly, I do the same thing. YouTube's my dismantling. I watch everything. It don't matter what it is.
Exactly. You get good. Right. You start to get a filter system going. You can watch somebody for 30 seconds and go, this guy's a waste of time. The way he looks, the way he's talking, the first words out of his mouth. Next, let's go find somebody who's got something intelligent.
Well, that's what we are, right? Our attention spans. I just don't have the time or patience anymore. It's not that I have a short attention span. It's like I just don't have it. I can't.
Well, no, Denny, I'm going to disagree with you. I think we do have the attention span. It just requires now that whereas in the past we would be easily fobbed off by what was on the TV and sit there and just watch it. Now there's an appetite to our brains, and when our time is being wasted we move on quickly, but once we move on quickly to something that's worth watching, we suck it in.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. Because
Yeah.
it has to be good though. Because I
Yep.
ain't playing around anymore. I don't have time for it.
I'm with you.
Alan, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I
Yes.
will
The
send
thanks are mine. The thanks are mine, because you've been a really gracious host and very hospitable. And thank you for putting a little wind in the sails of my little old book.
Yeah, I like your book. I recommend. Here, we'll give this another. So go to Amazon, go check out San and Fury, Rock and Roll Stories by Alan Niven. And it's not just Guns N' Roses and Great White. There's plenty of stuff in here for everybody. You really dig it. I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.
And I like these types of books that because like I don't have to invest a whole lot of like thinking. So I enjoy it. So again, Alan, thank you. I'll give you my email through your publicist. Is that okay?
Yeah. Ask Jamie to send me your email, and I need to send you Fighting for the Earth.
Sounds good. Yes. Awesome.
You have a wonderful day.
You too. Go eat
Thank
something.
You.
Bye.
I am.